Hello, everyone, and welcome. If you're getting ready for your baccalaureate in AMC, you know that figuring out how society is represented is a massive part of the course. So in this explainer, we're going to break down that very topic. We'll look at how stories are told not just in films, but in the streets we walk down every day, and even in the way we talk to each other. It's a way bigger question than you might think at first.
So let's just start with this big question. How do we read the world around us? And I'm not just talking about reading a book. How do we interpret the messages all around us? In a movie, on a city street, or in a simple conversation? Every single day, we are swimming in a sea of different stories that shape how we see society. Learning to read them with a critical eye is honestly one of the most important skills you can have, not just for your exam, but for life.
Okay, so this all fits perfectly into your AMC curriculum. We're working within Theme 1, Faire Société, and we're zeroing in on Axis 3, Représenter la Société. Now, the big guiding question for our entire session is this. How do different cultural narratives represent, challenge, and shape our understanding of society? Keep that question in your mind, because by the end of this, you'll have a really solid way to answer.
So here's our game plan. We're going to explore 3 totally different ways society gets represented. First, we'll look at film. Then we'll move to the city itself, and finally, we'll talk about dialogue. After that, we're going to switch gears and get really practical with some methodology for your exam. And then we'll wrap it all up with a conclusion that ties everything together. Sound good? Let's go.
First up, the cinematic representation. We're going to dive into the power of the filmmaker's perspective, or gaze, and we'll be looking specifically at the fascinating world of experimental documentary.
But before we go any further, let's make sure we're all on the same page with our most important concept, representation. It is absolutely crucial to understand that representation is never, ever a perfect mirror of reality. It's always a construction. It's a deliberate portrayal of something, shaped by a particular point of view, with choices made about what to show you and, just as importantly, what to leave out.
And that idea of construction leads us straight to experimental film. This quote from the Millennium Film Journal just nails it. You see, these filmmakers, they aren't even pretending to be objective. They actually lean right into being subjective because they want to explore the truths and fictions that exist in any document. Think about it for a second. An official government film about a war tells one story, but an independent documentary that uses personal letters and home videos from soldiers tells a totally different one, right? Experimental film lives in that gap, questioning the official story and proving that how you interpret things is, well, everything. This is a fantastic example of that in action. In this film, The Waiting Time, the filmmaker uses a fragmented collage style. So why do that? Well, it stops us from seeing one single, simple story about motherhood. The mainstream media often gives us this very idealized one-size-fits-all image. But this collage technique just shatters that. It forces us to see motherhood as this big, complex social institution, a messy collection of different experiences, pressures, and points of view. It's a visual argument for much more complicated truth. So here it is, the main takeaway for this section. This kind of filmmaking uses what we can call critical subjectiveness. The filmmaker's own personal subjective viewpoint becomes its most powerful tool. It's a deliberate choice to go up against the so-called objective, official version of history. And often it's done to expose some deeper social truths or to acknowledge past injustices that the official story conveniently forgets. Okay, let's shift our focus now. We're moving from the cinema screen to the streets. In this second part, we're going to explore urban representation, looking at how the city itself can be read as a complex story.
The key concept we need here is readability. You can read a city just like you can read a book. Its layout, the width of its streets, the way the buildings are arranged, all these things create a visual narrative. They tell you about that community's history, its priorities, its values. Think of Haussmann's Paris, with its huge, straight boulevards. That design tells a story of power, of state control, of efficiency. That's a very, very different story than the one told by the narrow, winding, dense alleys of Tokyo, which speak of organic community growth over time.
And this visualizes that idea perfectly. On the left, you see a real, lived-in alley in Tokyo. And on the right, you see a scientific analysis of that exact same space. It's a map showing how sightlines and paths have changed over time. This map is basically a way of reading the neighborhood story. It shows how the space connects or separates people. It tells a story of closeness, of shared space, one that grew naturally over decades, not one that was imposed by some grand top-down plan. So ultimately, the way these small outdoor spaces in Tokyo are used, the potted plants, the bicycles leaning against a wall, the shared benches, it all tells a really rich story about community and history. It just goes to show that representation isn't just something you find in a museum or a cinema. The very society we build around ourselves is a constantly changing visual story of who we are.
Right. Our third form of representation is, I think, maybe the most profound. We're going to explore the dialogic representation. This is a narrative of reconciliation that's not built through images at all, but through the incredible power of conversation.
Now, to really get this, we first have to define a really destructive social process called othering. This is what happens when a dominant group defines another group of people as fundamentally different, as not one of us. The simple act of creating an us versus a them devalues people, and it's so often the root cause of deep social conflict, prejudice, and discrimination.
So, how do you fight back against a narrative of othering? Well, one really powerful answer is to shift the whole story from one of punishment to one of restoration. This chart lays out two totally opposite societal narratives. On one side, you have punitive justice. It asks who is to blame, and its main goal is punishment, which creates more division. On the other side, restorative justice asks a different question. What harm was done, and how can we repair it? It uses dialogue to mend relationships and literally reweave the social fabric. It's a complete change in the story we tell ourselves about conflict.
And this is what that new narrative looks like in practice. A restorative circle isn't just a meeting. The physical act of sitting together, facing each other, sharing stories, and truly listening, it's a powerful form of representation in itself. It symbolizes a community actively choosing connection over division, building a new shared story that's based on healing and understanding. This quote from Sandrine, a victim of the Paris attacks, just cuts right to the heart of the whole issue. Fear, othering, they make it impossible to live together. The dialogic representation that we see in restorative justice is a direct attempt to answer her question. It works by creating a new, shared societal narrative, where that fear can be replaced by understanding and connection.
Okay, we have covered some pretty big ideas. So the question is, how do you take all this understanding and turn it into a high-scoring analysis for your baccalaureate? Let's get practical and talk about how to build the perfect analytical paragraph.
The method is simple, it's clear, and trust me, it is incredibly effective. It's often called PEE. First, you make your point. State your main idea in one strong, clear topic sentence. Second, you back it up with evidence. Provide a specific example or a short quote from the document that supports your point. And third, you give your explanation. This is where you analyze the evidence and explain how it proves your point.
Now let's see how this works with a real example. The first sentence here, that's the point. Experimental documentaries represent society by challenging the myth of objectivity. Simple. The quote about critical subjectivity, that's our evidence. And that whole final sentence explaining what it all means, that's the explanation. And you'll notice it connects everything back to the main idea. This structure, this is your key to success in the exam. Practice it. All right, let's bring it all home. In this final section, we're going to summarize the key findings and give a really clear answer to that guiding question we started with way back at the beginning. So, what is the bottom line? Well, first, representation is always an active process of constructing reality. We've seen how cinematic narratives use subjectivity to question official history, how our cities tell stories about who we are, and how conversations can literally rebuild the fabric of society. So, to answer our guiding question, cultural narratives in all their different forms are incredibly powerful tools that don't just reflect society, they actively challenge, represent, and ultimately reshape it. And that leaves us with one last question. And this one is for you to think about. It connects directly to another key theme in your AMC program, identity. So think about it. What are the stories, from the films you watch, from the places you live, from the conversations you have, that shape who you are and how you see the world? That's a question really worth exploring. Good luck with your studies.